When most people outside Canada think of the country, they picture a peaceful, liberal, forward-thinking haven full of polite people, universal healthcare, and government-funded everything. In the global imagination, Canada is the chill, maple-syrup-drenched cousin of the United States, less violent, more tolerant, and somehow always apologizing. But this tidy narrative doesn't tell the full story, and quite frankly, it papers over some pretty glaring contradictions. Let's take off the rose-coloured glasses for a moment. Canada has problems, serious ones, and they're not just inconvenient truths, they're structural issues that push back hard against the idea that Canada is some enlightened utopia. So, if you've ever caught yourself wondering whether the Great White North is as progressive as it seems, here are 6 reasons to reconsider. 1. The ongoing crisis of Indigenous rights. It's hard to talk about progressiveness in Canada without addressing the country's relationship with its Indigenous peoples. And spoiler alert, it's not good. Despite the endless land acknowledgements and half-hearted apologies from politicians, the lived reality for many Indigenous communities remains deeply unjust. We're talking about ongoing boil water advisories in dozens of First Nations communities, a situation that in some cases has lasted for decades. The truth is, Canada has a long and painful history of colonialism, one that continues to manifest through systemic racism, lack of basic infrastructure, and an appalling number of missing and murdered Indigenous women. If you're applauding Canada for its inclusivity while ignoring this reality, you're buying into a myth that erases an entire population's suffering. 2. Healthcare isn't as glorious as you think. Yes, Canada has universal healthcare. No, that does not mean it's perfect or even particularly efficient. While it's true that Canadians don't have to worry about massive medical bills from emergency surgeries or hospital stays, they do have to worry about waiting. A lot. The country's healthcare system is plagued by long wait times, doctor shortages, and underfunded services. If you need to see a specialist or get an MRI, be prepared to wait weeks, sometimes months. And if you live in a rural area, the situation can be even worse. Access is uneven, and while the idea of healthcare for all is noble, the reality often feels like a frustrating bureaucratic maze. 3. Affordable housing. Not so much. If you've ever tried to rent an apartment in Vancouver or buy a house in Toronto, you already know that Canada's housing market is an absolute mess. Prices have skyrocketed to absurd levels with no real signs of cooling down in any meaningful way. And this isn't just a big city problem, it's creeping into smaller towns and suburbs too. Wages haven't kept pace with housing inflation, and government efforts to curb the crisis have been sluggish and largely ineffective. So much for that social safety net. Young Canadians, newcomers, and low-income families are being priced out of stable housing at an alarming rate, and the issue shows no signs of going away. For a country that prides itself on fairness and equality, this housing disaster is a glaring contradiction. 4. Climate action that doesn't match the rhetoric. Canada loves to talk a big game about the environment. It signs all the right agreements, makes all the right speeches, and even dabbles in carbon taxes. But when you peel back the layers, it becomes clear that Canada's environmental policies are often more show than substance. This is a country that still heavily subsidises fossil fuel industries, even while claiming to lead the charge against climate change. Oil and gas are major parts of the economy, and political will to truly transition away from them is, let's just say, lacking. In fact, Canada is consistently one of the top per capita carbon emitters in the world. You can't slap a green label on a country that props up pipelines while wildfires rage across half its provinces. 5. The myth of multicultural harmony. Canada markets itself as a beacon of multiculturalism, and while it does have strong immigration programs and a fairly diverse population, the notion that everyone lives together in harmony is a stretch. Racism is alive and well, both the overt and the subtle kinds. Racial profiling by police, workplace discrimination, and underrepresentation in leadership roles are all ongoing issues. Hate crimes against racialized communities, particularly Asian and Muslim Canadians, have spiked in recent years. And let's not even get started on Quebec's Bill 21, which bans public servants from wearing religious symbols, a law that disproportionately affects Muslim women and Sikh men. Progressive? Not exactly. 6. Mental health is still the elephant in the room. Talk about mental health has become more mainstream in Canada, and that's a step forward, sure. But access to actual mental health services remains shockingly limited. Therapy isn't covered by universal healthcare, unless it's provided in a hospital setting, and psychiatric support is often reserved for the most severe cases. This means that the vast majority of people struggling with anxiety, depression, or trauma are either on long waiting lists or paying out of pocket. For a supposedly progressive country, mental health care is still treated as a luxury instead of a necessity, and that's a huge problem. So is Canada a lost cause? Not exactly. Now, to be fair, it's not all doom and gloom. Canada does get some things right, certainly more than many countries. The basic idea of universal healthcare is a good one, and it remains a crucial safety net for millions. The country is still relatively safe, politically stable, and offers more protections for civil liberties than many of its peers. And while issues like climate change and Indigenous rights are far from solved, there is a vocal segment of the population pushing hard for real change. The problem isn't that Canada is worse than other countries, it's that it's not as good as it thinks it is, or as many outsiders believe. There's a kind of smug self-satisfaction baked into the national identity, a belief that simply not being the US is enough to earn a gold star. But true progress requires more than just optics. It demands honesty, accountability, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Canada has the potential to live up to its progressive reputation, but it's not there yet. And it won't get there unless it's willing to take a long, hard look in the mirror.